The hall was packed. It was the day of the Global Tech Leaders Summit in New Delhi. Cameras clicked. Reporters whispered. Bodyguards stood at attention. The world's most powerful minds had gathered under one roof. CEOs, scientists, innovators. But all eyes were on one man seated in the front, Sundar Pichai. He was calm, humble, and focused. The room buzzed as people took selfies from afar. But just behind him, in the third row, sat a woman no one noticed. Her name was Lakshmi Pichai. She wore a plain blue sari, her hair tied back simply. No one asked her name. No one knew who she was. She kept her eyes down, her hands folded in her lap. The crowd didn't know that the woman sitting quietly behind one of the world's most respected tech leaders was his mother. Lakshmi didn't want attention. She never had. She believed her job was done long ago when she raised her children with honesty, discipline, and dreams stitched in silence. She had come to the summit only because Sundar insisted. He had begged her with a smile, saying, "Please, Oma, just this once." Still, she had chosen the third row, not the front row reserved for family, not the balcony, just the third row. From the stage, close enough to see her son speak, but far enough to go unnoticed. But something was about to happen that would change that. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, walked on stage to thunderous applause. The crowd rose to its feet. Flashes burst from every direction. But as he approached the podium, he paused. His eyes scanned the rows. First row, second row, and then they locked onto her. Lakshmi looked away. Modi turned to his aide and whispered something. The aide nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. Everyone was confused. Sundar glanced over his shoulder but didn't understand either. The Prime Minister began his speech. He praised innovation, hard work, and India's rising place in the world. He spoke of the digital revolution. He mentioned Sundar by name, but then he stopped mid-sentence. He looked straight at the third row. "Before I say anything more," he said softly, "I must acknowledge someone very important in this room." The hall grew quiet. People turned. Lakshmi froze. Modi smiled gently and said, "Today we celebrate the success of our sons and daughters. But let us not forget those who walked barefoot so their children could fly. Mothers like the one sitting in the third row." Lakshmi's eyes widened. The cameras swung toward her. Sundar stood slowly, his eyes soft with emotion. "Lakshmi Pichai," the Prime Minister said, "please stand." She shook her head, trying to refuse. But Sundar turned, reached back, and held out his hand. She looked at her son, then at the man on stage, and finally stood. The room, silent just seconds ago, erupted into applause. Not polite claps, not formal cheer, but thunderous, honest applause that echoed through the marble walls. Lakshmi bowed, slightly, her hands trembling. But then something else happened. Modi stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. No one expected it. Not the guards, not the press, not even Sundar. He walked past dignitaries and security, reached Lakshmi, and folded his hands before her. She gasped softly. He bowed his head and said, "Thank you. Not just for Sundar, but for reminding us what quiet strength looks like." Lakshmi tried to speak, but words failed her. Sundar wiped a tear before it reached his cheek. The cameras captured it all, but for Lakshmi, none of that mattered. Her son was proud. And for once, the world had seen not just the man he became, but the woman who shaped him. She had never wanted attention, but sometimes the universe has other plans. The next morning, Lakshmi sat quietly on the edge of her hotel bed. Her sari was still neatly folded on the chair. Her tea had gone cold. The world outside her window had changed overnight, but inside, she was the same. News channels replayed the moment again and again. Anchors called it a rare gesture, a historic acknowledgement, and a tribute to silent mothers everywhere. Lakshmi watched in silence. Her name was now known across India and far beyond. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. She had 63 missed calls and over 400 unread messages. People she hadn't spoken to in decades were trying to reach her, but it was one call, just one, that truly mattered. It came at 9:42 a.m. A quiet buzz. Sundar's name appeared on the screen. Lakshmi hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly. She pressed the green button. His voice was soft. Yes, Kanna, she replied. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Sundar whispered, I didn't know he was going to do that. Lakshmi smiled. I know, but he did. And you held out your hand for me, Oma. The world saw you. Finally, Lakshmi's eyes grew moist. The world doesn't need to see me. I only wanted you to see me. There was silence again. Then Sundar said, I always did. She closed her eyes. Her son's voice, full of emotion, meant more than the applause of any room. But as they spoke, a gentle knock came at the door. Lakshmi opened it slowly. A young woman stood outside in a formal navy blue dress, holding an envelope and a warm smile. Mrs. Lakshmi, she said politely, this is from the Prime Minister's office. Lakshmi took the envelope. The woman bowed and left. She opened it with care. Inside was a handwritten note, not typed, handwritten. Dear Lakshmi ji, India has long honored its great thinkers, leaders, and dreamers. But the roots of those trees are often unseen. Your presence yesterday reminded us of the soil from which greatness rises. I would be honored if you would join me for tea at the residence this Friday. Respectfully, Narendra. Modi. Lakshmi stared at the letter. T. With the Prime Minister. She sat down slowly. Her hands shook slightly. Not out of fear, but something deeper. A mix of surprise, honor, and disbelief. When she told Sundar about it, he paused. Amma, he said, this is not small. It means he wants others to learn from your life. Lakshmi whispered, I'm just a retired stenographer. Sundar smiled on the other end. Maybe that's exactly why it matters. The days passed quickly. Reporters camped outside the hotel, but Lakshmi refused to speak. She didn't want headlines. She didn't want makeup or speeches. She just wanted to be herself. On Friday, she wore a soft cream sari with a blue border, the same one she wore the day Sundar left for America, as the car arrived to take her to the Prime Minister's residence. She looked back once at the mirror. She adjusted the pallu of her sari, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, Go, Lakshmi. For once, don't hide. The road was quiet. No sirens, no escort cars. Just one black vehicle, and the weight of a lifetime riding in the back. Seat. When she reached the gates, security saluted her. Welcome, ma'am. Inside, everything was quiet. Flowers bloomed in rows. The air smelled of jasmine. And then, as she stepped onto the marble steps, the door opened and there he was. Prime Minister Modi stood waiting. No cameras, no lights, just two people, and history between them. He stepped forward and greeted her with folded hands. Namaste, Lakshmi ji. She folded her hands in return. Namaste, please, he said. Come sit. They walked side by side into the garden. Tea was set under a neem tree. For a few moments, there was silence. Then Modi said, Everyone wants to know what you said to Sundar that made him who he is. Lakshmi thought for a moment. She stirred her tea. Then she said, I never told him to be great. I told him to be good. Modi looked at her, and yet he became both. Lakshmi smiled faintly. That's his doing, not mine. He leaned back and said, What if we shared your story? Not for fame, but for others. For girls who feel small. For mothers who feel invisible. Lakshmi looked at him with surprise. What story? He smiled. The real one. The one behind the scenes. She didn't answer immediately, but somewhere deep in her heart, something shifted. Maybe it was time. Maybe her silence had already spoken enough. 2 days later, Lakshmi sat across from a woman named Anya. She was a soft-spoken journalist from All India Radio. chosen carefully by the Prime Minister's office. She wasn't loud. She didn't chase gossip. She just listened. And that's what Lakshmi needed. They met in a quiet guest house, garden, not a studio, not a flashy stage. Ananya opened her notepad, looked up, and smiled gently. "This is not an interview," she said. "It's a conversation. Tell me only what you want to share." Lakshmi nodded, adjusting the folds of her sari. Her eyes wandered to the flowers blooming nearby. Hibiscus, her favorite. Then she began. "My husband was an electrician in Chennai. We lived in a small house with one ceiling fan and shared a single room with 2 children. Sundar was curious from the beginning. He would ask why the fan made noise at high speed, why the radio caught signals at night but not in the morning." Ananya leaned in quietly. "We didn't have much," Lakshmi continued, "but we had rules. We respected books, we respected time, and we respected people, even if they were cruel. We stayed kind." "Was it hard?" Ananya asked softly. Lakshmi looked away. "There were nights I skipped dinner so the children could eat. Mornings when I patched the same school shirt 3 times. Once Sundar wanted a computer. I didn't know what it was, but he looked at me like it was a key to something." She smiled faintly. "So I pawned my gold chain." Ananya's eyes widened. "Your wedding chain?" "Yes," Lakshmi nodded. "He never knew, until now." The breeze passed gently through the garden. When Sundar left for America, Lakshmi said, "I packed 2 things in his bag. A packet of homemade snacks, and a folded picture of our family temple." "Did you ever feel angry?" Ananya asked. "That your sacrifices were invisible?" Lakshmi shook her head. "No, I wasn't raising a statue. I was raising a human. My pride came from watching him say thank you every time. Even now, he never ends a call without saying, 'Love you, Oma. That's my reward.'" Ananya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "People need to hear this, not just because of Sundar, but because so many mothers feel forgotten." Lakshmi nodded. "If my words help even one of them lift their head and smile, then yes, share it." And so, the story went out, not through tabloids, not through loud headlines, but in a soft radio voice that told of a woman who walked to work for 23 years without missing a day, who never bought herself silk because her son needed books, who stitched broken sandals together instead of buying new ones, who taught kindness through action, not words. The story spread like fire across India. People called her the mother of modern India's silence. Girls in villages wrote her letters. Boys said they shared the story with their own mothers. Some cried, some smiled. Many called their mothers after years of silence. And one day, Lakshmi received a letter from a school in Rajasthan. A girl named Meera had written, "Dear Lakshmi Auntie, I wanted to quit school because I thought no one would ever notice me. But then I heard your story. You didn't shout, you didn't demand, you just kept doing the right thing. Now I want to be like you. Not loud, not famous, but steady. Thank you." Lakshmi held that letter to her heart. It was not about pride. It was not about becoming a symbol. It was about being seen, really seen, for the first time in her life. Lakshmi walked down the market street in her hometown, and people smiled at her not because she was Sundar Pichai's mother, but because she had become a story of her own. But with recognition came something else. A call came late one evening. It was from the Education Board of Tamil Nadu. "Lakshmi ji," the voice said, "we are starting a scholarship for girls who want to study technology and science, but don't have money. We'd like to name it after you." Lakshmi sat down slowly, stunned. "The Lakshmi Pichai Initiative," the voice said. Her lips trembled. She had never dreamed her name would be written in bold letters on certificates. She had spent a lifetime writing other people's names as a stenographer, and now hers would help open doors. But life was not done surprising her yet. A week later, she received another call, this time from someone completely unexpected. A woman's voice said, "Hello, is this Lakshmi Ji? I'm calling from the office of Michelle Obama, the former First Lady of the United States, would like to speak with you if you are free." Lakshmi's hand went cold. She sat silently for a moment, then she said softly, "I'm listening." The call came at exactly 7 p.m. Lakshmi sat in her small living room, wearing a warm maroon shawl, her phone on the table beside her. Sundar had called earlier and said, "Oma, this is not a normal call. Please listen carefully." Then, the screen lit up. An international number flashed. Lakshm. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello, this is Lakshmi speaking." A warm voice replied, calm and kind, "Hello, Lakshmi Ji. This is Michelle Obama. I hope I'm not disturbing your evening." Lakshmi blinked slowly. For a moment, she forgot to respond. Then she said, "No, ma'am, it's an honor." Michelle laughed gently. "Please don't call me ma'am. I've read about you. I've heard your voice on the radio, and I just wanted to say thank you." Lakshmi's fingers gripped the edge of the table. Michelle continued, "Your story reminded me of my own mother. She also stayed behind the curtain, but she shaped everything I became." Lakshmi swallowed softly. "Thank you. I never thought someone like you would listen." "Lakshmi," Michelle said, her voice steady, "women like you are the pillars the world forgets to thank. But your patience, your strength, your quiet belief, that's where change begins. Not in power rooms, not on stages, but in kitchens, in school lines." Tears slid silently down Lakshmi's cheek. She didn't speak. Michelle paused, then added, "We are launching a global program for mothers who raise leaders in silence. It's called Roots of Greatness, and we want to begin the very first chapter in India with your story." Lakshmi's voice broke a little. "But I don't know anything about programs or speeches." "You don't need to," Michelle said. "You just have to be you." After the call ended, Lakshmi sat still for a long time. She looked at the framed photo of her husband on the shelf. She whispered, "You always said he would do something great, but you never said the world would knock on our door because of it." The next day, the announcement was made. The Roots of Greatness initiative would start in Tamil Nadu, focusing on mothers from rural communities who had kept their children in school despite poverty, illness, or cultural pressure. Lakshmi would be its first ambassador. She was hesitant at first. She had never spoken in public before. But with gentle encouragement from Sundar and her newfound strength, she agreed to attend the launch. The event was held in a large school auditorium. Hundreds of women from nearby villages came, wearing simple cotton saris, some barefoot, many holding the hands of young girls with curious eyes. Lakshmi stood backstage, trembling slightly. She was not afraid, but overwhelmed. A woman handed her a small microphone. "Just speak from the heart," she said. "Don't worry about grammar. Your voice is enough." Lakshmi stepped forward slowly. The crowd grew quiet. She looked out at the sea of faces, some old, some young, all waiting. Then she spoke. "I never thought I would stand on a stage like this," she began softly. "I used to type letters for other people. I never imagined anyone would type my name on an invitation." A soft ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. "But today, I stand here not as a famous person," she continued, "but as a mother, like many of you. I have cried in silence, worried alone, given up small dreams so my child could chase his. I know what it feels like to wonder, does anyone see me? Does anyone care?" The crowd listened in stillness, and I want to tell you, as someone sees you. Maybe your child is too small to say it. Maybe your husband forgot. Maybe the world never asked your name. But you matter. Women in the crowd began to wipe their eyes. Lakshmi continued, her voice steadier now. "You do not need to wear medals. Your strength is already shining in the life you hold together every day. And if your child grows up and forgets the smell of your hands, or the way you stayed hungry so they could eat, remind them gently, you deserve to be remembered. When she finished, the hall stood in silence. Then came the claps, loud, raw, not for fame, not for power, but for truth. After the speech, a girl named Rashmi came up to her. She was barely 10. Her uniform faded and too big. She looked up and said, "Auntie, my amma said we're poor, but today," she smiled, and she said, "Maybe I'll be someone one day." Lakshmi bent down, held the girl's hands, and whispered, "You already are." News of the speech spread, not in shouting headlines, but in quiet shares on social media. People posted clips with captions like, "My mother needed to hear this. I wish my grandmother could have lived to see this moment." Lakshmi Pichai speaks what millions of women feel. Meanwhile, back in Chennai, something else was changing. Lakshmi's old neighborhood, where narrow lanes twisted like puzzle pieces, began preparing something special. Her former neighbors, friends, and even old school teachers had gathered to create a surprise. Sundar had been told not to say anything one morning. As Lakshmi returned from the grocery shop, a group of children ran up to her and said, "Come quick. Something is happening near the park." Confused, she followed them, and there, by the side of the main street, stood a small, beautiful new library, freshly painted, full of donated books. On the front wall, a simple nameplate had been placed: the Lakshmi Pichai Community Library, for mothers, daughters, and dreamers. Lakshmi covered her mouth with her hand. One of her old neighbors smiled and said, "You taught us how quiet people build strong homes. Now you're helping build strong minds." She stood there, frozen in emotion, as children opened books inside. It was no monument, no statue, but it was something that would last far longer, because it carried stories. Lakshmi sat by the window, holding a letter in her hand. It had come in a simple brown envelope, but the seal at the corner was "Official President of India." She opened it slowly, not out of pride, but out of disbelief. Inside was a handwritten note and an invitation. "Dear Lakshmi ji, we would be honored to present you with the Padma Shri for your lifelong contributions to education, dignity, and the silent strength of motherhood. Your story has touched hearts, built libraries, and inspired thousands of young women across the nation. Please join us at Rashtrapati Bhavan on Republic Day. Respectfully, President of India." Lakshmi stared at the paper, not out of vanity, but out of memory. Her mind went back to the day she left work for the last time. The office had clapped politely. Someone gave her a small flower bouquet, and she went home quietly. No one asked her story then, and now the President of India was asking her to stand in front of the nation. She folded the letter carefully, placed it next to the photo of her late husband, and whispered, "Do you see, Ganesh? Our little life made it here." Days passed quickly. Preparations were made, not by Lakshmi, but by her neighbors, her friends, and even strangers who felt like family now. A tailor came to her door with a cream-colored sari gifted by a local women's group. Sundar flew in without telling her. He said, "Only Uma, I want to see you walk that hall." On Republic Day, Lakshmi entered Rashtrapati Bhavan with quiet steps. The halls were wide, the ceilings high, and the lights soft and golden. Other awardees stood tall beside her: scientists, artists, doctors, but everyone knew her. Some nodded with respect, others simply smiled when her name was called. The room fell still. Mrs. Lakshmi Pichai recognized for inspiring silent strength in Indian motherhood, and for her contribution to women's education through personal story and national movement. Lakshmi stepped forward. Her hands didn't shake. Her breath didn't race. She received the medal from the president, folded her hands, and bowed her head. No speech was needed. The cameras captured the moment, but it wasn't the lens that mattered. It was the feeling that millions of unseen mothers had, for one moment, been seen. That evening, Sundar sat beside her on the garden bench behind the hall. He leaned back and said, "Amma, you're now part of history." She smiled and replied, "No, I'm part of you. That's enough. He held her hand gently and looked up at the sky. Do you know what's strange? He asked. What? She said softly. People ask me how I built Google, but now they ask me how you built me. She chuckled. Tell them the truth. Which is? Sundar asked. She looked at him with warmth. I didn't build you. I just never let the world break you. Back in her town, more change was quietly unfolding. The government launched the Light campaign, named unofficially by village girls, who said, if she could shine so late, maybe we can start early. The campaign focused on giving scholarships to girls whose mothers had never been educated. Lakshmi was asked to guide the messaging. She didn't write fancy statements. She just wrote a small note on the top of every brochure. Your mother walked, so you could run. Now run far enough to bring her back into the light. Letters flooded in again. A young man from Bihar wrote, my mother worked in silence her whole life. I never saw her cry, but I never saw her smile either. After I watched your story, I hugged her for the first time. She cried, and I did too. A woman from Kerala wrote, I always felt invisible. Now my daughter tells her teacher, my is a light, like Lakshmi auntie. Thank you. Lakshmi now spent her mornings walking through the library garden, watering the small plants, sometimes reading stories to children. She still lived in the same home. She still made her own tea. One day, as she swept her porch, a little girl walked up shyly and said, Auntie, can you tell me how to be like you? Lakshmi smiled gently and said, first, be kind when no one is looking. Then stay strong when no one is helping. And then one day, your kindness will come back to you in a way you never imagined. The girl nodded, not fully understanding, but she would, someday. That night, Lakshmi looked at herself in the mirror. She saw wrinkles, soft eyes, quiet strength. Once, she had lived in the background, but now, she was the light. The summer winds had arrived early in Chennai. The air was warm, but the streets near Lakshmi's home were filled with gentle activity. Girls in bright uniforms passed by the newly built Lakshmi Pichai community library. Mothers gathered in circles, exchanging ideas about school, scholarships, and even online courses. Something had changed, not just in buildings or programs, but in how they saw themselves. Lakshmi now walked through these streets without being rushed, without needing to hide. Her eyes met others. They smiled, not because she was famous, but because they saw her as one of their own, a woman who had never claimed a spotlight, but had become a symbol of what quiet resilience could look like. One morning, Sundar arrived unexpectedly. He carried no laptop, no suitcases, just a small photo frame wrapped in cloth. AMMA, he said. Stepping inside, I want you to see something. He unwrapped the frame and placed it in her lap. It was a photograph. In it, Lakshmi sat on a wooden bench at the Roots of Greatness launch event, reading a book to two small village girls. They sat beside her with open eyes, open books, and open hearts. Behind them was a small sign that read, "The future begins in her hands." They want to place this in the Google India headquarters, Sundar said, softly, in the main. Lakshmi looked at the photo for a long time, then said, only if they also hang one in the village library. So those girls know they're just as important. Sundar nodded, smiling. Already done. That afternoon, a local school principal visited Lakshmi. Lakshmi ji, she said, our girls' school is being rebuilt. We'd be honored if you would inaugurate it. Lakshmi blinked in surprise. But why me? I'm not a teacher. No, the woman replied, but you taught a generation to believe in themselves. The day of the school opening arrived. Children lined the entrance, holding paper flowers. A choir sang a simple song about mothers, dreams, and light. Lakshmi stood at the gate with a ribbon in front of her and scissors in her hand. Her hands, once calloused from household chores and years of typing, now trembled not from fear, but from deep emotion. She cut the ribbon, the children clapped, and suddenly, from the crowd, a girl shouted, "3 cheers for Oma Lakshmi." The whole crowd echoed, "Hip hip hooray." Lakshmi laughed, tears rolling down her cheeks. Later, during her small speech, she looked at the sea of faces and said, "I used to believe the most powerful people were the ones who spoke the loudest. Now I know, the most powerful are the ones who lift others without making noise." The crowd stood in respect, but one person was missing that evening. Lakshmi sat quietly in front of her husband's photo. She lit a small lamp, placed flowers beside the frame, and said, "You once said our life was small. You were wrong. It was wide enough to hold the world." A soft breeze came through the window. Outside, the moon shone over the little library. A girl sat on the porch, reading a science book, her mother watching from a distance, with pride in her eyes, far away. On a global conference stage, Sundar was being honored once again. But this time, he ended his speech with a pause. He held up a small photo of his mother cutting the school ribbon and said, "This is my hero. This is the reason I'm here. Not just because she believed in me, but because she never stopped believing in herself, even when no one else did." The room stood in silent admiration. Somewhere, in a quiet lane in Chennai, Lakshmi put away her phone and turned off the lights. She sat on her porch with a cup of tea and listened to the distant sound of children playing. Her journey had begun, in silence, but now her silence had become a voice, and that voice had become a legacy. Not for fame, not for medals, but for every woman who had ever wondered, "Does anyone see me?" And now, the answer echoed loud and clear, "Yes, we see you, and we thank you." A year had passed, but the world had not forgotten. Lakshmi Pichai had become more than a name. She had become a gentle wave that kept reaching new shores. Village walls now had her quote painted in bold letters, "Kindness is not weakness. Silence is not emptiness." Schools shared her photo during morning assemblies. Mothers whispered her story at bedtime, not as a fairy tale, but as truth. Yet, Lakshmi remained unchanged. Her house was still simple. Her clothes were still cotton. She still made her own tea. But something within her had bloomed. Not pride, but peace. On her 72nd birthday, the town organized a quiet celebration. No stage, no loudspeakers, just a long table under a banyan tree, filled with letters from children, framed drawings, and plates of her favorite snacks, banana chips, and more. Sundar flew in again, this time with his wife and children, as they gathered under the tree. Sundar's daughter sat on Lakshmi's lap. "Patty," she said softly, "what does your name mean?" Lakshmi smiled. "It means goddess of wealth, but not just money. It means wealth of love, strength, and patience." The little girl nodded. "Then you are really Lakshmi." After cake and laughter, Sundar stood and cleared his throat. "Amma," he began, "you've become something none of us expected. A light, a guide. And now, I want to show you something." He took out a small tablet and opened a video. On the screen was a short animated clip. It showed a young girl walking through hard times, rain, hunger, loneliness. But every time she fell, a quiet figure appeared beside her. The figure never spoke. She simply stood nearby, holding an umbrella, offering food, or gently helping her rise again. At the end of the clip, the girl grows into a confident woman, and the voiceover says, "Behind every strong child stands a silent mother." Meet the story of Lakshmi Pichai, because not all heroes shout. The screen faded to a message, a new documentary, releasing worldwide, translated into 13 languages. Premiering on Republic Day, Lakshmi covered her mouth with her hand. Tears fell. Not from sadness, but from being deeply, fully seen. "Amma," Sundar said gently, "this will go to schools, villages, and even refugee camps. Your story will remind every mother and child never to give up." That evening, they walked through her street together. Neighbors waved. Children ran beside them. An old shopkeeper said, "The whole world is proud of you, Lakshmi ji." She smiled and replied, "I'm just proud of them for seeing." But that night, alone with her thoughts, Lakshmi did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up a pen and a plain notebook, and she began to write. Not for the world, not for fame, just for herself. Hey, story that started with a girl who rode buses with second-hand books, and became a woman whose voice healed hearts. As she wrote, her last lines were simple. "I thought I was invisible, but it turns out, I was just waiting for the right time to be seen." Weeks later, the documentary aired across cities, towns, and villages. Families gathered to watch. Some cried. Some sat in silence. Some mothers were hugged that night for the first time in years. And some children whispered, "Amma, you're just like Lakshmi." A ripple had begun, and it didn't stop. 5 years later, a young woman stood on a college graduation stage. Her speech was broadcast across hundreds of screens. "I come from a home where my mother never went to school," she said, "but she never let me stop dreaming. And when she wanted to give up, I showed her a story, the story of Lakshmi Pichai, and she stood back up." The crowd clapped. Somewhere far from the noise, in a peaceful room filled with light, Lakshmi sat in her chair, wrapped in her favorite shawl, her hair now silver, her steps slower, but her smile still soft. She turned off the television, looked outside at the setting sun, and whispered, "You did well, Sundar." Then she paused, and added, "We did well." She closed her eyes, and let the world rest gently around her, because her story born in silence would now echo for generations.